Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Words of Wisdom podcast. We are finally live. Today we have a very special guest. The guest is Mr. Ross Clarkson, who is also my dad. So, just a heads up, if I'm ever looking down, I've got my iPad with notes just to keep you guys up to date. So, for those
And
of
I'm
you who
sure there
know him
will be
as
no favoritism, so
absolutely none. So, for those of you who don't know, my dad is actually a cinematographer, scriptwriter, editor, camera operator, director. Basically, when it comes to movies, have you done any acting?
yes, I have twice. I got shot and killed, and I died very well in a Hong Kong in two Hong Kong films. That
So
was my length
essentially,
of acting.
he's done everything in the movie industry, and to go with that, he's got 40 plus years of experience and has worked on plus or minus 70 movies, and most of them are action movies. So, Dad, thank you so much for being the first guest. This is going to be a special episode because not only is it my dad, it is someone who has played a huge part in my life, and I'm very happy you can be the first guest.
Well, I raised you, so it's a bit of a special part. Changed your diaper
So,
once or twice as well.
I hope it wasn't too dirty.
Yeah, I wouldn't bring that up. Try to
All
forget
right.
some things.
All right. So, I don't think I've ever actually asked you this, but what made you pursue film?
I was interested in photography from, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 years old, because my father, he had an old Super 8 camera.
Mm,
And, we used to watch home movies, and then the neighbor would come over and he would maybe put on slideshows and stuff. And I just had an interest in photography. I even, at school, I used his camera and one roll of Super 8 to enter an art project at school. But back then, things were quite primitive. So I had to record my dialogue on a tape recorder and play the film, and
ooh,
then push play on the recorder to play it. So there's nothing
oh.
synced up or anything. And yeah, and then one day I saw a news crew on the street and a news cameraman, and I went, that that's interesting, because there were no film studios in Brisbane at the time. Film The film industry in Australia was very tiny. And once I know think I got to like grade 11, or what you call year 11 and 12, I used to spend most of my school holidays up at TV stations, carrying
Mm,
tripods and whatever, to get to know people. And because there was no work experience organized, so you had to get on the phone, call people up and say, hey, do you mind if I come up and learn something and carry whatever, and just generally hang out
yeah,
and stuff? And they went, sure. And then when
sweet.
yeah, so I went around the TV stations, which were up a hill in Brisbane. And actually, when I was leaving school, they were just changing over from film to video, because I used to shoot all the news on film.
Wait,
And there were
Dad.
40.
Sorry to interrupt. For those, because I remember the first time you explained the difference to me, I didn't quite understand before you did. For those younger people, what's the difference between shooting on film and shooting on video?
Cost.
Oh.
And film, you got to stick it in the magazine, thread it through the camera, expose it correctly. There's none of this auto exposure stuff and whatever.
Mm,
Process it. then it would go through a telecine chain to be projected to a TV. So
Um,
that would be, it didn't go to cinema because it's news for television.
yeah,
And they were just changing over because video had just sort of been invented.
yeah.
And of course, they want to save money and whatever. So there were four positions open at Channel 9.
Mm,
And I just happened to be there at the time. And I was just finishing grade 12. And the news editor said, "Oh, would you like a job?" And I went, "Sure," as a trainee editor. And I went, "Sure. Do you want to see my school report?" And he goes, "No, I don't care. We just like your attitude." And I said, "Well, thank God for that, because it wasn't the best at school.
oh, don't worry.
Only did well in what I was interested in." And so I left school on the Friday and I started at Channel 9 on the Tuesday.
And I remember you told me something very interesting. You told me that something about your grades were amongst the lower end of the class, but you were the first person to actually go out and get a job as well.
Oh, totally. And I had to go and see the guidance officer. Well, everyone had to go and see the guidance officer. And they said, "Oh, what do you want to do?" And I said, "Oh, I want to be a news cameraman." And they said, "Well, we don't know anything about that. But looking at your grades, have you thought about joining the railways or the army?" And I went, "No." And basically, "Well, thanks for your time. See you later."
Yeah.
And I walked out. And I was the first one. And actually, the TV station was paying above ward wages for at the time, which I think was 1980. And I still have a copy of my first pay slip, which was 80 Australian for a week,
80s.
less tax.
But also, I mean, 80 Australian back then, that's the equivalent, like nowadays, of quite a bit, no?
It was enough to get by on and stuff. Yeah,
Mm, sweet.
for and that's including the tax coming out. I think
So
the tax was maybe
did
$5.
you like photography more and you sort of accidentally fell into film, or did you always want to do film?
I was always uh, interested in film, but to me it was always a mystery. Same as just watching commercials, how they looked so good, and doing news. It's like, okay, it's nothing special, and I couldn't figure out how. And as they opened up Village Roadshow Studios on the Gold Coast,
Hmm.
I, yeah, you could say I sort of bullshitted my way into being a loader, which is a person who puts the film into the magazine and helps out the main camera guy, the focus puller or whatever, and do the paperwork and all this type of stuff on second unit
Hmm.
on a remake of the Mission Impossible series, which was being done on the Gold Coast. And
Sweet.
I'd never touched film in my life, and it was 35. It was all expensive and everything. So when they were unloading the truck, I was just watching what the other guy was doing, and he said, "Okay, load up a couple of magazines, and I'll see you on set." I waited till he took the corner, went into the dark room, pulled out some film, ran it through the magazine, figured out how to do it,
Hmm.
loaded it up, and I ended up full time on it.
Sweet.
And but
Sweet.
on the first day, they pulled out big lights and things and everything. I learnt more in that one day than I had for the past few years. And then I just suddenly
Hmm.
realized I'd been wasting so much time.
Yeah.
Um, I had to move on. So
Yeah.
I just pushed in that direction. But again, the opportunities in Brisbane were extremely limited.
Yeah. I mean, back then as well, everything was probably, I mean, mainly just America, right? Like the big movies.
Yeah, there were American TV shows. Yeah. And then finally,
Ah.
I moved to Hong Kong and got a job working for Salon Films, who were also the agents for Panavision
Mm.
in Asia, and a big
Mm.
rental company, and they were making commercials and stuff. And I think in the first year I did like 30 commercials. And on my days off,
Hey.
or when on my spare time, I'd go to the rental side, learn how to use a Steadicam, playing with wheels, just playing with whatever equipment I wanted to.
Yeah.
So the learning curve just went straight up.
Cool. So I remember, I remember you told me a bit about your news days, and I remember hearing those stories, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So just a few of the, because everyone thinks, oh, when an accident happens and stuff, it's always, the paramedics are there first, and by the time the actual news reporter comes and the cameras start, everything's cleaned up. But I mean, tell me a bit about
No,
some of your experiences.
normally depends on what the
Graphic
accident is.
disclaimer.
If they want to send a reporter, he or she comes in much later, and we had
Mm,
police scanners in the cars, and several times we turn up first, but you're not if somebody's deceased, you're not allowed to show number plates, so you got to wait for the body to be removed so you can actually film something. Uh, so I think I was still 18 or something when I started seeing dead bodies in accidents, and did that for 6 years. And that some of that stuff does stick to you. It certainly changes your sense of humor, and
mm,
you learn how fragile life actually is.
yeah.
And I feel sorry for first responders, because by the time a person gets to hospital, they've already been cleaned up to a certain extent. You're not on the scene listening to them screaming in agony for half an hour while they try and cut them out of a car. Um, and people who get burnt, you can smell the burn, or if they're drowned or gunshots, and sometimes you stand on brains that are frying on the road or whatever, and after all that you go and
Ooh.
have McDonald's.
Happy Meal? Probably not a Happy Meal,
Well,
right?
you got no, just extra sauce. Yeah, I mean, you still got to have lunch, don't you?
So, I mean, I think the worst I've ever seen was I don't even remember what's the worst I've ever seen, but I can imagine that takes an impact, like takes a toll on your head. Like how did it change your perspective? Does it make you
You have to
scared?
joke about it. I'm sure every medical person, and they deal in it their own way. And there was one week where every day there was a semi trailer accident, and somehow I went to every single one of them, and just every
Ooh.
single day dead bodies. And as they drag out a large person out of a car, and you hear them sloshing around as they roll on the road, and whatever. And there's certainly things you remember. The worst one was a young girl had a accident, and her thigh was snapped in half, and they had to bend it further around to get her out, but they didn't want to
Oh.
knock her out because they wanted to examine her. And when they dragged her out and just laid her on the road, there were already doctors there. They stripped her naked, checking for injuries. And it wasn't until the next day they had a photo of her pre-accident, and I think she's only like 19 or something, and attractive young girl, and she died. And it's just like, there's no dignity and that type of thing, and just feel sorry. And there was another young female driver, and this kid's riding his bicycle home from school,
Oh,
and his chain broke, and it threw him under her car, and she drove over him, and she just freaked out.
whoa. So this podcast took a turn. But no, that really just goes to show you that, it like including myself, like I always thought that doctors, the medics got the worst of it, but that just goes to show you that, you know,
No, it's the ambulance and the fire dudes.
yeah,
Because one night, this motorbike rider came round a corner when it was wet, went straight up the back of a semi trailer with concrete reinforcement hanging off the tail of it, copped it straight through the helmet, and he's just hanging there. And the ambulance and the fire brigade are having an argument as to who's going to drag him off. And it's like,
yeah, guys,
guys,
I've
can you
I've
sort this out, because we can't film anything while he's hanging there.
yeah, guys, I've heard a few of his stories, and each time you hear it, you it's not pleasant to hear. But
No, no, but that
hasn't seeing those things helped you, I guess, be more creative with your script writing, because you've seen death in so many different ways that when it comes to movies, you can think about it in so many different ways.
not so much that, but it's in
Oh,
camera operating and that type of thing. You have to film with both eyes open, especially on
mm,
fires and gun sieges and things, because you've got a blind side to your camera. So you have
yeah,
to pay attention, because on news there's no second take. So you have to be aware of what's going on, what's the main thing, depending on the time, uh, how much time they have to edit the film, to edit your piece, to get it onto TV. So you might
yeah,
have to really limit what you film, so the editor doesn't have to go through half an hour of footage. And also back then, one cassette was, I think, 20 minutes. And if you shot
not
20
that long.
minutes, you're going to get yelled at. So you could only shoot 5 or 6,
Yeah, damn.
but you got to keep looking all around. So that's why operating on action just became second nature.
Yeah,
You always
because
expect
I
the unexpected.
because I remember, for those of you who don't know, when I was young, I was my dad's travel buddy. So whenever he had films and stuff, I would go to it, and I'd always be amazed by how, quick he is to adapt. And it wasn't until I grew up and actually, I mean, gained a bit of age that everyone would say your dad is so good at with the camera. He just knows where to be, how to be, what to be, and bon voila. So you'd say actually a lot of it came from news, right? Because of what you just said.
A lot of a lot of the famous Australian camera people most of them all came from news.
Mm,
And well,
damn.
especially camera operators, because also most of it, you hold the camera all the time, and you've got to
Yeah.
learn how to hold it steady. So when I did one film, I actually got brought in later, and they had a different camera operator, and the director wanted it to have a handheld look. And I watched a little bit on the monitor, and I said, "Oh, do you want me to shake the camera like him?" And he goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, if I shoot handheld, it doesn't shake like that, but I can shake it like that if you want." He goes, "No, I just want it handheld. I didn't know you could actually hold it steady."
Well, that's what the experience does. So,
Yeah, so the news guys, we can actually hold cameras pretty steady, and also your time, your movement with the actor's movement, and you don't notice walking and
Yeah.
stuff as much at all. Just depends how you do it. And a lot of times you
Sweet.
still have eyes open.
Yeah. Interesting. So, so just because, I mean, I could ask questions about this all day, but we're on quite not a limited time. But if I don't start, asking, if I don't move forward with the story, we're going to be stuck here all day, Dad. I can go on all day about these questions. So,
I can go on
so
a
you
week.
moved to Hong Kong, and then, so what was it? I mean, okay, for those of them who don't know, in fact, I don't think many of them know, you didn't just have like a normal, like, well, not abnormal, but your parents were quite strict. So leaving Australia for the first time, that was your first time when you left to Hong Kong, right?
Uh, no, I'd been on a holiday outside of Australia before
Hmm.
once, but I didn't know one single person in Hong Kong when I came here.
What was moving to
And
Hong Kong
then
like?
I came with a suitcase and a couple of $1,000 in my pocket and no guarantee of a
Yeah,
job. But my boss then, he had a house just up the road from you, actually, at Marina Cove, and said, "Oh, you can stay there if you like, but it needs renovating." And I said, "Okay, do you want me to renovate it for you?" Because I knew some building stuff from before.
yeah,
So I basically renovated it for 6 months, and he'd give me a little bit of work. Soon as I finished renovating it, he kicked me out because he could rent it out. But then he gave me a job. So
oh well,
and
I mean,
then
at least there's
then
that.
after a year in the contract, it was like, oh, you can get a 5% pay increase. By then, I figured out what people get paid, and I said, no, double up.
Yeah,
Sorry, I don't want 5%, double up.
yeah,
And he did. So I stayed working for
sweet.
him for nearly 7 years, shooting 90% of their jobs.
And was that more commercials? You said that was commercials, right? When you were working for
Commercial,
him?
government, corporate videos, commercial video, corporate videos. Did a lot of traveling through China.
Hmm.
Um, some directing corporate videos and things because the boss always said, "Oh, we're going to make our own films," which they never did. So it got to a point where, okay, I want to continue and do films because I'd worked through the company on a couple of films, just again as camera operator. And so at this point, I just bit the bullet and said, I'm leaving.
And that
And
was
luckily,
and that
that
was
was
that
on
was when you were in
90,
Hong Kong, right?
yes.
Ah,
And I'd
all right,
done
got you.
one underwater piece for a Hong Kong film, which I took to Australia and shot on the Barrier Reef. And then suddenly word sort of went around saying, oh, he does underwater filming.
Yeah.
And then Ringo Lam, who's now passed away, wanted to do an underwater scene in Hong Kong for his movie Full Alert. And they contacted me, and I went and saw Ringo, who's always smoking in the office and stuff, and told me about what he wanted. And it's like, he seemed like such a nice guy. Yeah, great. So they built this 30-foot drain pipe by 6 diameter, and that's what we filmed in the middle of winter, of which was absolutely freezing.
Sounds cold.
And the headlines of one paper, I think it was Apple Daily or something, said, "Oh, the actor is pissing in the water," and it's like, yeah, he ain't the only one. We'd all pop our head up and drink coffee, and no one's getting out because you want the warm water to go through your wetsuit and whatever.
Oh.
So just don't drink the water.
Yeah,
And it was I got on well with Ringo, and who also just lived up the road
yeah.
from where you live. And he called me up one day saying, come over for a coffee or dinner or whatever. And then he said, "Do you want to shoot my next movie?" And I went, "I'd love to. Just to be
Cool.
honest, I haven't shot one before." And he said, "Well, have a go."
What was
And I
that
went,
like?
"Okay." He wanted to do something like Die Hard in the Philippines, full
So
on
when
action,
you say
everything.
you haven't shot, like when he told you he wants you to shoot his film and you say you haven't shot, you mean like you haven't, like that was your first time where you were actually shooting a movie as a cameraman?
Yes, as
What was
the
that
director
like?
of photography.
What was that
Well,
like?
it was, you got to meet the schedule, you see the locations. Again, it had a limited budget. Um, it was only I actually saw his other personality come out, because he did have a reputation for having quite a temper. Um, and getting by with that and finished the film and learnt a lot, because he was really into camera operating. So he was
Yeah.
very specific about how you frame things and whatever. And to this date, I hold the record of doing the most films with him, which was like 7. He took me to Canada to operate on Replicant. That's where I met Van Damme.
Hmm.
And then I got along well with Van Damme. He took me to Israel and Bulgaria. That's where
Hmm.
I started working for Millennium Films. And it just sort of
Yeah.
snowballed and kept going.
If you were to, I mean, probably can't get the exact number off your head, but if you were to guess how or estimate how many different countries you've made movies in, how many would it be?
Well, now I did my first film in Australia just a couple of years ago. I'm from
That
there,
was
but I never shot
the
a film there. Bring
that
him
was
to me.
the one. Yeah, that's in, for those of you who are, it's still in, is it still in cinemas? No, right?
No, no, I think that was what,
But
2 years ago or something.
oh right, it was during COVID, wasn't it?
No,
Or
COVID had finished. I was in the UK at COVID, so Australia, UK, Nevis, Philippines, Thailand, Canada, US, Malaysia, Bulgaria.
which which one of those countries have you? I know there are a few because I remember we went to, what was it, Morocco and stuff like that as well.
Morocco.
But
Yep, so that's
out of
10.
all of those countries, which one has the most scary or frightening moment that can take top spot?
Oh, totally the Philippines on Ringo's first movie, because we're doing this scene on the bridge going into Chinatown where the helicopter drops a 40-foot rope ladder, and the heroes, and then we got the 2 helicopters and a major gunfight going off, blowing up
Yeah,
cars on the bridge and everything. And the helicopter would come in, the mercenary helicopter would come in, pick the actor up out of the water and fly off. And we'd done
yeah,
it a few times, but then the sun was going down, the pilot wanted to go home, Ringo wanted to do it one more time, and we'd always come in sideways and just parked next to the river.
yeah,
This time the pilot decides to hook around, catches the rope ladder on a fence. Suddenly we're diving, heading straight for the river, which is black. And luckily he was a good pilot. He was ex-military. He's pulled on the brakes. There was a guy on the other side who only had a rope around him. He's gone out the door. I've gone into the pilot seat. I got smacked in the head with the camera. And as he reversed up, I look around and it's like, oh, someone's missing. The guy on the other side. So
Yeah, he's
I've
gone.
suddenly I've looked at the harness I'm in, and I've figured out that
Yeah,
if a helicopter hits water, it's going to flip upside down because your heavy part's on top. The blades will spin just as fast underwater as what they do in the air. So you can't get out until it's fully flipped in black water in a strange harness. And it's like the last thing I want to do is drown just because I can't get out of a harness. So from that moment on, I bought all my own safety equipment. So I could get out of anything upside down, spinning, whatever, because I know where everything is. So I
yeah.
stuck my head out the side door, and here he is hanging onto the skids with his rope around him, and he was a bit of a large boy. So it's like he'd broken 4 ribs or something from smacking into the skids. I said, look, I can't help you up, but I'll just hang out here and keep you company
Yeah.
until we land. Because we had to wait for someone to go and unhook the rope ladder off a fence.
Oh,
So that would totally be the scariest one. There was a time in Bulgaria where this army truck's coming down the hill, and they said, okay, it's going to come down the hill, hit a personnel carrier, go over the embankment, fall over, and the gold's going to fall out the back. But where all this was happening, there was a big bush in front. So I said, okay, look, I need to put up 12-foot scaffold
yeah,
so I can see over the bush, but we're a fair way distance, and this was a war movie. So we dug
yeah,
trenches, bunkers, and things around the place. And they said, look, we're not going to
yeah.
put a roll cage in the truck. So we're going to get the stunt guy to tie off the steering and
Oh,
lock down the accelerator, get it going, jump out, and let it go. So they did that. And my focus puller, he was an old guy. So I said, look, stay down there. I'll go up there by myself.
smart, smart move.
And so, the truck comes down the hill fastest I've ever seen this piece of shit going, misses the personnel carrier by about 10 feet, goes down the embankment, goes up on 2 wheels, and then levels out. That's when I jumped because just as I was
Smart.
jumping off, it took out the scaffold just as I was leaving because suddenly
Yeah.
everyone's screaming, jump!
Oh,
And it ended up snapped the camera in half, and the truck ended up another 100 yards down in a ditch we had dug. And the producer was pissed, and he's saying, "Why did you put the scaffold there?" And I said, "Well, why didn't you put a roll cage in the truck? And apart from that, what if I didn't jump?"
oh. I hope you like the taste of dirt and truck.
So
So, with
it doesn't matter where you are. They have safety officers and whatever. Personally, I look after myself. I don't trust anybody.
yeah, because the last thing you want to do, right, is be in a situation where if you had your own equipment, you could escape.
No, I had already planned. If things go south, I'm going this way because there was a bunker and it had like sandbags and things, and I knew where I was going.
Yeah.
And as soon as that truck leveled out, I went.